If you watch anime long enough, you know that some people have called it problematic. Like how the harem anime genre is actually misogynistic, the medium actively sexualizing high school students, or how Americans are portrayed. I don't think it's patriotic enough. We can do better, boys! But one trope in anime that gets people online really talking is that of the loli. No other trope in anime or manga can get people on Twitter arguing more than a character that looks like this. Some people say that it attracts a certain demographic, other people say that it's not real and that it's not a big deal. But regardless of all of that, the trope has been a mainstay in Japanese anime, manga, and games since forever. As someone who's been watching anime since high school, it's actually harder to find stories without a loli type character in it. And because of that, anime, and by extension otakus, have garnered a bit of a reputation for being weird in that way. But what if I told you that just because it's everywhere in anime and manga, it doesn't mean it's actually well liked, even by the people that made it? That's right, even the Japanese don't like this trope, as much as some people on the internet tell you that it's somehow normal over there. And it's all because of a Japanese serial killer. So what gives, right? Why is the loli trope and genre a thing? How did it get started? And why do they portray it in the way that they do?
And well, the answer to that is a lot more complicated than you think. Now, I want you to forget for a moment how weird the loli trope and genre can be sometimes, and purely look at it as a medium of fiction. Hard to do when you got scenes like this, but just try. Because while the trope does have some negative connotations today, it actually kind of started with fairly innocent beginnings. Emphasis on fairly. For example, a lot of people think that the cute little girl trope has always existed in anime, but that's not really the case. During the 1960s and 70s, one of the biggest trends in manga was an aesthetic style called gekiga, a style of drawing that emphasized realism and mature cinematic storylines. But some artists at the time weren't really satisfied with this. They wanted characters to be more expressive and emotive. So, artists like Hideo Azuma, taking inspiration from the shoujo manga of his time, were the first to break away from mainstream aesthetics and do their own thing. Okay, you know that blobby look that you see in a lot of modern anime? You know the one. Super rounded faces with eyes that take up half the head. Yeah, this style of drawing kind of started with shoujo manga, a story genre that was primarily meant for young girls and women. But manga artists who were looking for change, like Hideo Azuma, saw this and just decided, hey, we should be able to do this for other genres too. And with this wave of artists making this type of character design in stories outside the shoujo manga genre, it kind of helped to popularize it. They didn't directly create the loli trope and genre, but these more exaggerated proportions and expressions kinda laid the groundwork for future artists to iterate upon. Now, I do need to mention this just to be fair, that not every early loli character was originally created for purposes. While the trope would eventually be eroticized in the 80s, a huge chunk of them were made purely to be as endearing and as cute as possible. But that isn't to say that everything that influenced the loli genre was simple and wholesome. The appeal for the trope was also influenced by Japan's IRL entertainment industry, in a very sketchy way though. During this time, Japan was going through a bit of a pop idol boom. The modern day Japanese pop idol scene would get its start during this period. It was characterized by very pretty, but very young talents. For example, Agnes Chan, one of Japan's earliest pop idols, was only 17 when she released her hit song, Poppy Flower. Momoe Yamaguchi, another early Japanese pop idol, was only 13 when she first applied to become a singer. Add on the fact that this was kind of the pre-enlightenment age where media was predominantly catered to the male gaze, which is how you get 15 to 17-year-old girls singing lyrics like, "If that's what you want, I'm okay with anything you do to me. I'm alright with rumors that I'm a bad girl." Or, "We all experience just once the sweet snare of seduction." Yeah, both of these songs were from Momoe Yamaguchi when she was only 14 years old. And you start to realize that Japan's idol industry is not beating the allegations of exploitation when you learn that her songs were intentionally written to be as suggestive as possible because these were the ones that were selling. Apparently, her early songs really weren't that successful, but that changed when the talent agency she was with gave her a songwriting and composing team that intentionally wrote very risque lyrics to help sell her music more. Keep in mind, she was only 14 and 15 when she performed the songs I quoted just now. You can't convince me that the talent agency didn't know what they were doing. Again, just like the artists from before, while this didn't magically make Japanese people attracted to adolescent fictional characters, it did help to normalize a bit the idea of consuming media involving adolescent and immature women. All of this is to say that the lolicon genre was the culmination of everything that was going on in Japan during the 1970s and 80s. Some artists in the 70s wanted manga to be more expressive, so they made characters with proportions more exaggerated and emotive. Japan's idol industry was being born, so talent agencies wanted really young talents to capture the predominantly male audience's imagination. And unironically, Japan also just has an innate addiction with anything cute. It's a huge reason why Japan has some of the best known cutest mascot characters in the world. Sanrio, Chikawa, Chiton, this fucking thing. My point is, we can't just call Japan creeps and leave it at that. There were plenty of societal influences independent of each other that resulted in the idea of the loli trope. Hell, it's even alleged part of the reason why loli manga is a thing in the first place was because of the yaoi genre. The logic being that, well, since yaoi was originally for female otakus, male otakus in Japan thought they deserved their own genre, and in turn, they created loli manga as a response. Don't ask me how that line of logic progresses. That's just what I read. Now, I know I'm leaving out other influencers for time. Like, one thing I didn't get to mention was the 1980s lolicon boom. Yes, that's the actual name of the period coined by some researchers, where stories involving this trope were at its most numerous. But I do hope you get the idea that the real truth behind the trope and genre is a lot more nuanced and long-winding. Like, one thing you gotta remember is that a lot of the things that influence the idea of the loli trope and genre happened over years, if not decades. We humans have a really bad tendency to compress events that happened over a large span of time into a really small period. But what if I told you that this wasn't always the case though? That Japan actually came around to hating the loli trope and genre. That at a certain point, Japan genuinely had a satanic panic level of outrage against lolis. Now, if you know anything about online discourses, you know it's a lot of accusing people you don't know of things you think they do. I would know. I dressed up as Moist Critical for a TikTok once, and someone immediately called me sexist. And the loli trope is no different. If you say you're a fan of it, you've probably had a lot of opinions pre-made about you. But there is actually a precedent that shows this kind of thinking, specifically in the Tsutomu Miyazaki murders. Tsutomu Miyazaki was a notorious Japanese murderer and what ate 4 Japanese girls aging from 4 to 7. And to avoid being demonetized, and because I'm not a true crime channel, the long story short is that this case shocked Japan. During investigations, it was found that Tsutomu Miyazaki was a huge consumer of anime, manga, and videos. And when this information was made public, all hell broke loose. In Japan, there was an immediate stigma to anything that was labeled as otaku. It was these kinds of things that Miyazaki had consumed. So it had to be these kinds of things that urged him to do what he did. Japan was quite literally in an otaku panic, in the same way that America had their own satanic panic. There was a genuine fear that if young people continued to consume these types of stories, they were just gonna be too lost in the sauce and brain rotted. Now, here I'm gonna have to do the one thing that most video essayists don't wanna do. I'm gonna have to refute myself. Because while there was a crazy media storm surrounding Tsutomu Miyazaki and the terrible things that he did, there are some that allege that the Japanese media kinda ran away with the whole thing. For example, Japanese novelist and social critic Eiji Otsuka alleges that Japanese news outlets at the time really wanted to play into the public emotions by focusing really hard on the fact that Tsutomu Miyazaki had a huge manga collection and even consumed loli manga and videos, completely ignoring the fact that up until that point, Tsutomu Miyazaki had a well-documented troubled childhood with neglectful and emotionally distant parents, a very close and beloved grandfather that died early in his life, thus depriving him of the only adult figure that cared about him, and early childhood isolation he alleviated by reading manga unsupervised. Even researchers like Sharon Kinsella, a noted sociology lecturer who specializes in studying contemporary Japanese pop culture, said that it was actually quite normal for people people around Tsutomu Miyazaki's age to own the amount of media that he did. And to really round things off and to give a fair shake to the degenerate weebs, here's a quote from Japanese psychologist Saito Tamaki in his book Beautiful Fighting Girl that talks about otaku sexuality. Quote, "As far as I know, the actual sex lives of otakus are extremely wholesome, even boring, which is to say that their sexual desires are wholesome and ordinary, not that different from regular folks. It's not unusual for male and female otakus to date, and once the men are able to earn a living and attain a position in society, they go on to marry normal women completely as a matter of course. Yeah, there can be some real freaks sometimes, but that can happen to any community." But the overall point I'm trying to make is that Japan is not immune to having their own satanic panics. Playing into the public emotions aside, there was a genuine worry in the kinds of stories that were being told in anime and manga. Enough worry, actually, that the Japanese government started to crack down on any media that they thought took things too far. Japan also doesn't just give a free pass to lolicon media, as some people on the internet would say. There's this idea online that because of how perverted anime and Japanese games can be, Japan is kind of like this mecca of free speech and that you can make any story that you want. But there have been plenty of instances where the Japanese government themselves are the ones to bring down the ban hammer on certain stories. Now, you can absolutely debate whether or not that in of itself is a good thing, but my point is, Japan themselves can also see the kinds of stories they make and also find it weird. By and large, they're just like you and me. If you think it's weird that this character looks like a kid, chances are someone in Japan also thought the same thing. But even with all of this, Japan continues to make stories involving loli characters. It's a very popular trope that's passed the test of time and withstood an entire moral panic. But the question still is, why though? Why is this trope seemingly everywhere and still going strong in the modern day? And the answer is, well, what if I told you that there is no answer? So I know it's a cop-out to say that there's no real answer as to why Japan keeps making lolis. In before, someone calls me a dirty centrist for not taking a stand, but hear me out. And this is mainly because there are so many hands in the pot when it comes to making lolis as a trope and as a genre. For example, would you believe me if I said that this guy right here was an indirect pioneer of the loli genre? That's right, Hayao Miyazaki, the acclaimed Ghibli director and creator of your favorite childhood animated movie, kinda also led to the creation of the loli trope and genre. But not really. Cause you see, one of his earliest movies, Lupin III, The Castle of Cagliostro, had a character by the name of Clarice, who was super popular amongst male otaku circles. And this adoration for the character was very much non-sexual. A lot of fans professed their attraction to Clarice was mainly due to her fairy tale and girly aesthetic. Hell, even the term lolicon or Lolita wasn't even used to describe or inappropriate content. It was mainly used to refer to this kind of character trope. And that's what I mean by there's no clear answer as to why Japan continues to make lolis, because there's a lot of things that intersect with the idea of it. Some people would say, oh, it's because it's a genre by sick Japanese men for other sick Japanese men. But there were women in these spaces making these kinds of stories for men at doujin events. Others would say, oh, it's because this trope and genre has always been problematic. But at the same time, like I said, most, if not all, early lolicon stories were purely non-erotic and platonic. That said, the inverse is also true. While the loli trope and genre did start with the simple fact that some people found these characters super cute and endearing in a completely platonic way, doesn't mean you can ignore the many instances where these kinds of characters were put into really inappropriate positions just because the creators could. For example, one of the earliest lolicon anime was the creatively named Lolita anime in the 1980s. And in it are things I can't even mention on YouTube if I still want to have my channel by the end of this video. And I tried to find any reason that the creators could have made this anime. Maybe it was a commission piece for a particularly sick individual. Maybe it was just some weird circle jerk material for the studio themselves. And I couldn't really find anything. It really does seem like they made it purely because they could, and so that they could sell it to the weird otakus that would buy it. I personally think that the lolicon genre genre and its usage just comes down to how we as an audience, and sometimes as creators, interact with fiction. And this actually has been talked about in Japan before, in a book called The Ethics of Affect by Patrick Galbraith, who is another accredited researcher who specializes in talking about contemporary Japanese pop culture. What is it with white people and wanting to research Japan? I have no clue. But in the book, he interviews legal expert Shinichiro Hirata asking about the ethics in regards to consuming very controversial media tropes like lolis. TLDR, because Hirata's opinion about this spans multiple pages, and also because I'm officially unk status and sitting down to edit for like 3 hours is starting to hurt me. But Hirata basically says that there's something called the ethics of moe and the responsibility of the otaku, which in dumb speak means that even though these things are fictional and shouldn't be treated as a reflection of the people both making and consuming it, doesn't mean that it's not above criticism. Hirata is basically saying, yeah, you shouldn't outright ban it because that's just gonna be a lot more legal and social problems than it's worth, but fuck, you gotta be willing to criticize what you watch. He stresses that just because it's not real doesn't mean that it can't have real life consequences. You have to face and acknowledge the really uncomfortable parts of the media you consume to make sure you don't just go overboard. And I personally subscribe to this. As a longtime anime nerd and watcher of anything Japanese, you kinda learn to tune out the really weird parts of the medium. But just because I give a free pass to some tropes and genres in anime and manga doesn't mean that I don't question how they can look sometimes. I firmly believe that as time goes on, we need to reevaluate how specific tropes and genres are portrayed. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely can understand why some people who aren't familiar with anime or manga can be weirded out by shows that look like this. And I'm of the personal belief that there is a lot to criticize of the loli trope, especially when we know when some people have used it to height a specific audience. But between the 50 years of artists, moral panics, internet discourse, and enough academic papers to make me question whether it was going to be even worth making this video, I just realized that the whole loli trope exists because it can. A cute little girl character is just a simple thing that everyone can get behind. That even the people who are most ardently against the trope have consumed it before. It's just the horrible fact that some people have chosen to take advantage of that in the worst way possible. And while I can't give you an answer more satisfying than that, I can give you context. And context is the closest thing we're ever gonna get sometimes.